With the release of Demon Souls on the PS3, From Software made their first entry into a genre of their own making. From the Souls series to Bloodborne and Elden Ring, these games had their own takes on the Souls-like genre with many similarities. One of the common identifying elements was the high level of difficulty. This partially contributed to the niche nature of them. The player needed a certain mindset to be determined to beat these games. In many ways, compared to other games, these Souls-like games offered an experience that wasn't common in the AAA space, and more suited for an indie game. What started as a very niche set of games had an audience that continued to grow, to the point we see with Elden Ring's early sales, showing that while From Software never deviated or changed their identity to capture more gamers, but rather more gamers found themselves slowly gravitating to these games for their uniqueness. With the recent release of Elden Ring, we again see the discussion of From Software including an easy mode so that more people can play the game. I wanted to take some time in this video today to discuss the importance of well-crafted difficulty, along with how altering the design of these games, and especially Elden Ring, would only offer an inferior game. I present to you my defense for difficulty in Elden Ring. Elden Ring is an engrossing experience. While not for everyone, for those that choose to pursue it, you will find something that you both would expect from the developer and be surprised by. Part of what makes this game so great is the difficulty. Now, part of this comes from the overwhelming odds that you are faced against, from the intense boss fights to common foes that can take you out at every turn. The enemies all present themselves with a set of attacks that the player can either quickly adapt to, or learn from death or repeat encounters. These fights are not full of moments where the game explains when to attack, how to defend yourself, or even the best approach. From Software instead provides visual cues that the player needs to pick up on, like the enemy changing the position of their hands on a weapon to indicate a certain attack. This means that many of these fights can be frustrating for players, especially for first-timers, but it also means that it provides higher rewards by providing room for the player to achieve victory through their input with no hand-holding by the game itself. This figuring it out type of design is placed on several other areas outside of the combat encounters. For one is how the exploration is presented to the player. Once you enter the open world, you do not have traditional quest markers indicating where to go or even what to do. Part of the beauty of this open world is how it actually presents a fully realized non-linear approach, and it is done through some smart design choices. For example, in the first area you will come across a boss. He may seem extremely hard, and you might think that this is the game's way to inform the player that the bosses will be really tough. And while that is true, it also informs you about the open world. This tree sentinel is hard right now, and by putting this foe at the start, it indicates to the player maybe you should try and go somewhere else, and that the obvious path forward may not be the one that you should take right now. This is really smart design because it encourages players who are having a hard time with him to actually explore, grind, find new items and locations that might be easier than this area. The satisfaction comes from the player picking up on this and then acting on this information, rather than being told to go to a specific point. This shows how the open world is completely open to you and how your approach to it is completely up to your preference. At the same time, if you want to keep trying the tree sentinel, you can do that. It might be easier if you go somewhere else, get stronger, and then return back for a rematch. In some ways, Elden Ring is kind of the anti-AAA game in that it doesn't handhold you throughout the entire experience. This is the first time From Software is applying their Souls formula to an open world setting, and they nailed it on their first attempt. Elden Ring says here's a handcrafted world full of rich gameplay. Now go and figure it out for yourself on how to win. Now, I've only scratched the surface on how the use of difficulty is used throughout almost every aspect of Elden Ring. For people requesting an easy mode thinking that they might be missing out on enjoying this game, because it is too hard, they fail to understand that an easy mode in any of these games would effectively ruin the design of what these games, and especially Elden Ring, is trying to provide. If you make the game easier with less challenging fights and a less obscure design, you will lose out on parts of the identity that makes this game special. How can a player feel that sense of satisfaction satisfaction from figuring out a tough boss if the boss is now a cakewalk? How is it satisfying to grab a secret weapon or item when the game handholds you to it? There's no simple easy mode to implement in these games. Like I said, difficulty is interwoven into many areas of it. So this push for an easy mode is really a push to fundamentally change what these games are. It is important to note too that Elden Ring is not a Sony exclusive, with character development and frequent cutscenes. From Software games do not have story in the traditional sense. Instead, they feel like a textured world that makes the player feel like they are traveling through a land with rich history. I could understand the request to include a story mode-like option, where the game is a lot easier so that someone who wants to enjoy the narrative can with casual difficulty. But this is not something that should be applied to every game, and especially not applicable to Elden Ring. Elden Ring and the rest of From Software's Souls-like games should not change their intended design to make them easier to pick up. They continue to present this high learning curve, because that is part of what makes them special. If the player is truly interested in one of these games, then the player should be willing to adapt to what the game is providing. If they are not, then that is fine, then they should find another game that suits their preferences. For example, I appreciate driving sims, the options, modes, and all of the customization, but I prefer something more arcadey like Burnout or Need for Speed, so I do not then want racing games to accommodate me. That would ruin what makes them special. Not every game is made for everyone, and more importantly, every game is not going to accommodate everyone. Now, generally, developers want the most people playing their game because that usually means more copies being bought. And for the Souls games and Elden Ring especially, the audience for them has grown by the developers sticking to their original identity and thesis of overcoming tough odds. Like I said before, Elden Ring sold incredibly well, and very much shows that while this series of games started as niche, its design philosophy was never compromised to reach a wider audience. These developers work to better their formula, never deviating from their core identity. The Souls games require a dedicated player willing to really dig into the mechanics. This learning curve has proven to be a wonderful hook, as it leads to a unique sense of satisfaction only found in the best of this genre. These games are not for everyone, but they are for everyone willing to dive into these mechanics and push themselves in a way to overcome the odds, whether through player skill, working with friends or random allies, or finding help through the many communities of Souls players. Considering how hard these games are, there is this notion of paying it forward and helping out new players willing to give it a try, and that is one of my favorite aspects of the community that has risen from these games, and Elden Ring is no exception. Before you ask for an easy mode, take a hard look at what exactly you're asking the game to do. Are you really pointing out flaws, or are you trying to find aspects of the design that would fundamentally change the identity of the game? If you're interested in these games, I would suggest starting with one of the more inviting iterations. Bloodborne pushes a more aggressive playstyle while having a health mechanic where you can earn health back. It is still very tough, but this was the first game that I beat in this genre. Or try Elden Ring, as I think it's more welcoming than any of the other games. A lot of this comes from the non-linear open world. You may find yourself up against a hard boss. You can then turn around and go in 8 other directions to continue your journey and come back stronger. Or you can summon some real players or friends to aid you in the fight, or even use AI summons. Elden Ring's most welcoming aspect is how it provides you with a great amount of options for you to use, along with an open world that features actual exploration. While this discussion of difficulty in these games continues, it is reassuring that the developers also understands what makes their games great. It doesn't look like they're going to change to make these games easier, and that's a good thing. So that was some of my thoughts on difficulty within this genre. Let me know what you thought in the comments section below, and if you are playing Elden Ring, let me know how your experience is. If you're interested in being notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button and bell. And if you would like to support the channel and get early access to content, please check out my Patreon. All of the links will be at the end of this video and within the description. And thank you very much for watching.